The following programming is sponsored by Mark J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group. Entrepreneur, founder, author, and financial advisor Mark Bernstein helps high-performing business owners turn their visions into reality. Through his innovative work and the Forward Focus forums, Mark connects entrepreneurs to resources that fuel their success. Founders Forum is a radio show and podcast where entrepreneurs share their journeys, revealing the lessons they've learned and the stories behind their success. Join Mark and his guests for a mix of inspiration, valuable insights, and a little fun. Now, let's dive in.
Good morning, America. How are you? It's we're in Philadelphia today recording. Sometimes we're in Florida. Sometimes we're remote. Today is proof that it's not always sunny in Philadelphia. It's kind of a cloudy day, but it's pleasant day, pleasant fall day. I love this time of the year. Beautiful season changes. The leaves are beautiful. Our guest here is Kevin this morning. Good morning, Kevin.
Hey, good morning. Good to be with you.
I'll introduce him in a minute. And our topic of the day was suggested by Kevin, and I love it. And I'll explain why I love it after we talk about it. But it's about being of service, which I know is important to you in your life. Tell me why that is and how you feel about it and how you exercise that.
Well, I guess part of it is I grew up with parents that were very much, how can we serve the community? So it was always sort of out there anyway.
Right.
And then I went into the military, which is obviously quite service driven. Right. And since then I've, being
Marine
an entrepreneur.
Corps. Thank you for your service.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And, ever since then, it's just, I find ways in the community. If they ask, I do it, right? If I sit on the zoning board, I help out with the parks in my church. I do, if there's a thing we can do and I get my kids to help with it too, I think it's just a good backbone being part of the community.
Well, you're a great example. The reason it was on my mind and it was such a good topic for you to pick is yesterday I was at the Sattel Institute CEO conference, semi-annual CEO conference. I've spoken about this on the show. It is a representative for corporate social responsibility, so it meets businesses with nonprofits. So that's all we talked about all morning yesterday was how to best be of service.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you and I talked about this offline. Yesterday featured the Philadelphia Eagles, who are really known for their work. They do a lot of different things, but they're most known for their work in regard to autism. Mm-hmm. And the woman who runs the Foundation for Autism spoke, and she was brilliant. And another thing we were talking about that we'll talk about is culture. And we were talking about Don Smolensky, who's the president of the Eagles operation, talked about, and you've had experience. Maybe you talk about your experience with that with the Eagles for a second, if you want.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to go to a corporate hosted event where I got to meet Don and, the whole executive team at the Eagles. And being a transplant to Philadelphia, I adopted the city. I adopted the Eagles. I bleed green because I want to,
Right.
So getting to hear from the leadership how top down their executive culture is and how much they try to push that into the locker room, onto the field, was honestly inspiring and fun to hear. And that happened to be the year we went to the Super Bowl in the 2017 season. Then I went to another corporate event in the 2022 season and again last year. So I think every time I go to a corporate event at the Eagles Stadium, we go to a Super Bowl. So I'll just leave that out there as a general invite.
There you go. So by the way, so that brings me to my point too, that being of service can happen. They talked about not just similar to you, not just when you're out there doing service work, but being of service every day in your company, to other employees, to your mission, to whatever that is. And that goes throughout the organization. And everybody that was talked ended with what I'll say to you, go Birds,
Of course.
Which I actually saw a funny video this morning. That's another word for thank you for holding the door, or thank you, people do this. Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
It's become
never a bad greeting or, yeah.
Right. It's become, what's the word? Omnipresent, I always have a hard time saying this. Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous.
Become ubiquitous.
Yes.
Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Anyway, so Kevin, thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
So Kevin is Kevin Hyde. He's president of Layer 8 Security. He's a cybersecurity expert with more than 2 decades of experience building cyber operations for both private industry and the U.S. government. During his 21 years of service in the Marine Corps, intelligence community, and U.S. Cyber Command, He helped create and deploy cyber maturity models and training programs for allied nations. In the private sector, which is pretty heavy-duty stuff, in the private sector, he's led business growth across technology, consulting, and e-commerce, bringing a rare blend of national security and business expertise to the cybersecurity world. That's a lot. It's pretty cool.
If you told
pretty
my
impressive.
15-year-old self that would be my bio, I would not have believed you, for sure.
So that's pretty impressive, and I can imagine that would be the case. So let's talk about your entrepreneurial career. I know it started young. So why don't you tell us how that happened, how you got into the Marines, and what happened after that?
So my dad was a serial entrepreneur, and like most entrepreneurs, there are ups and downs. But the idea of work ethic and knowing how to work hard was always present. Didn't have that, like, you want to earn money, you want to do a thing, have a thing, you better work for it. So I always had that since the time I was probably 12. I had jobs. I was sweeping out, construction sites. I was mowing lawns. We moved up north when I was a teenager. I was shoveling driveways, cleaning windows, whatever I could do. And same thing in college. We didn't have gig economy jobs, but I was working in bakeries. I was selling vinyl windows and doors door to door. Like, I had jobs that definitely fell into the suck range, right? But it taught me a lot. And so I've always had that work hard spirit. But then I went into the Marine Corps, right? And that's a very different style of living because you're just dedicated to that craft of building Marine culture, furthering the mission, whatever that might be, wherever you are. I went into the Marines in 99. So when 9/11 happened, my life changed overnight. I was a public affairs officer at the time, and we went from being media relations, community relations, to suddenly crisis response, crisis action. And that led to a whole other life. The entrepreneurial side of my life, though, my dad calls me the accidental entrepreneur because I never thought I'd help start a business. That wasn't a goal of mine. I happened to be paired up with a good friend who was into that lifestyle, wanted to start a business, had the means to get it going, and he and I co-founded Layer 8. So the going straight from the ranks of the Cyber Command and the NSA and the Marines to the private sector starting a company was a very unique transition.
Was it a culture shock?
It was a culture shock. I felt like I was afraid to be too bold because in the transition from being Marine, I was a staff officer, as a major in the Marines, you're working for the lieutenant colonel who's working for the colonel who's working for the generals and so on. And you're trying to do everything right to make sure that they're happy with the outcome. And as an entrepreneur, it really just matters, are you happy with the outcome?
Yeah, by the way, I hadn't thought about that a lot, but being in military service is almost the opposite of being an entrepreneur.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
I hadn't really occurred to me that way, but that's
there's no SOP for it. It's part of the job I did at Cyber Command, I was pulled in to do it because there was no SOP and I had to create it. And so that was a good aspect, I found that I could do. But as an entrepreneur, you definitely don't have, there's no, here's what you do.
But even that, they gave you the job to create an SOP.
Yeah.
So you're there to do what you were told. Entrepreneurs are you almost have to do what you're not told and figure it out.
Yeah, kind of.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is no really one book. There's all kinds of book about entrepreneurialism, but nobody really tells you follow this step by step. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, you'll know if it's not working when it's not working.
Right.
That's how you know.
Right.
Because no one's buying what you're selling.
I talk a lot about on this show, Kevin, that it's not necessarily a smooth ride, to be an entrepreneur, right?
No.
So tell us about the beginnings of the business and what kind of challenges you faced, because everybody does.
It's funny. When we first got going, I had spent, years with, in uniform, trying to defend American interests from the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and whatnot in cyberspace. Going to the private sector, we thought we have this great set of services that we can provide. Let's do that, and we're going to keep these companies safe. And honestly, in 2014-15 timeframe, that was a really hard sales job. Nobody really understood what they needed and didn't think it mattered to them, or they weren't important enough. But that wasn't true. So we had to pivot to not just where they are, okay, we had to sell them on, you need cybersecurity, then we had to sell them on and let us do it for you. So there's always two sales jobs. Finally, though, we realized the trend really wasn't just about who wants to be better protected, because everybody does. It was really about what kind of compliance requirements do you have? If you're a biotech, you've got FDA. If you're publicly traded, there's SEC. If you're, in the healthcare sector, there's HIPAA. There's all these acronym soup out there that create these requirements for people. So we figured out how to craft the services around those compliance requirements so that it was an easier construct for someone to buy into, to understand, and then they'd get how we fit perfectly to help match it.
I think we talked about Sari Green, who was a guest on this show, who started one of the earliest cybersecurity companies by accident in, I think, like 2002, something like that, in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And really, there was a need with a company, and they fulfilled the need, and they just kind of walked into it. But I know that it was like the Wild West then, I think.
I think so. And honestly, I think it was very software. People probably called it computer security at the time. Like the term cybersecurity didn't exist when I was in college, so I certainly didn't get an education in it from a young age.
Right, exactly.
It would have to have been something that you sort of fell into. Yeah.
And you're feeling your way through it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So that was your challenge. It's morphed into something other than what you originally
figure
thought.
out why people really wanted it. What really made them want to get into, okay, now I get why I need it and why you're the best team to help me with it.
What's the division of labor between you and your partner? How's that work?
So basically, as the president of the company, and he's the CEO, as the president, I run the revenue team, which is, the branding, the sales, marketing, business operations side of the world. I bring in most of the client relationships, just from, hustle in general, right? I mean, Jeff does too. Everyone is focused on that, but this is a thing that I end up being, pretty focused on. 90% of the time is bringing in new clients and making sure the current clients are happy. So I spend most of my time there.
What kind of strengths did you and your partner develop? Excuse me. What kind of strengths did you develop in terms of meeting those challenges of the ever-changing landscape of cybersecurity?
So I would say this, it was staying on top of trends was always key, right? Cybersecurity, every day there's a new breach. You can't know everything about every breach. So what we try to know is pick the verticals. And so what we did was we said, all right, between healthcare, biotech, financial services, mortgage companies, and now government contractors, they all have huge requirements to meet. So what do we need to do from a services standpoint? So Jeff is always very focused on, are the services relevant? And then are we delivering them properly? Really, it's one of the biggest keys for us. And then I'm focused on, how do we get those relevant services into the marketplace? And so sort of dividing and conquering, if you figure the roles and responsibilities key, that's kind of how we divvied it up. And, we also try to make sure we're never overdoing it. Like, he and I rarely need to be in the same room at the same time. Why not split, divide and conquer? So we figured that out pretty early on.
You have complementary skills, which helps a lot.
Very much.
Yeah, very good. Looking out, we only have about a minute before break. So I want to ask you, talk to me a little bit about your company culture.
Well, we try to be very enthusiastic about each other's wins. When somebody gets root on a system, we're doing a penetration test, we celebrate it with a win. We make a sale happen, we ring the gong, we put out emails, we try to celebrate wins.
Oh, nice.
Because we're a small organization, right? Yeah. We're like 30 employees and always, scrappy and growing, but we try to make sure we're celebrating wins. We also train our people, and that's something a lot of companies in our field don't do, because they're afraid if they train people and they get certs, they're going to go somewhere else.
Okay.
But, there's that old adage.
They don't want them to know too much.
Yeah, and they also don't want them to be too marketable but that's not how we operate.
Right.
We want people at the top of their game and not exercising a year-old process. We want them having the latest, greatest all the time. So
want
that
them to
innovation
be their
key.
best.
Yeah, keep them at their best and keep them innovating and thinking fresh about how to solve problems, and not just sticking with some old, stay on, day on old process. We want them thinking fresher than that.
I'll bet your Marine background helped with that, because aren't the Marines all about always being your best kind of thing?
100%. You know, did you do something today to make the life better for somebody around you? As a leader, I always think like that. I try to always think like that.
Right.
By no means am I perfect.
Right.
It's a huge emphasis is what have you done to look around and make sure someone else is doing it well?
Amazing. Well, with that, it's a really good place to take a short break, and we'll be right back on Founders Forum.
Establishing a self-directed Roth IRA or other self-directed retirement plan offers access to investment options usually only available to well-connected or wealthy individuals. Anyone can build wealth and achieve tax-free income for life and financial freedom without the inordinate risk of speculative investing, securities, trading exotic financial instruments, or hoping for the best from the stock market. Since their start in 2003, Gamma Plan has come to be synonymous with expertise, flexibility, responsiveness, and diversity in investment choices. They provide innovative investment opportunities for investors seeking direct control and more choices in how they deploy their investment capital. Gamma Plan doesn't just make it possible to invest in alternative assets. They also teach investors how to put their money to work. Take the road to financial freedom today. Go to gammaplan.com/foundersforum.
We're back on Founders Forum with my guest today, Kevin Hyde. Great to have you here, Kevin. So far, I'm really enjoying the conversation. One of the things you and I talked about prior to the show was, which is very important to you, is work-life balance. You know, your wife travels for her job, and sometimes you're home alone with the kids, and you've got this business to run. Want to expand on that a little bit? Yeah,
it's all about, you can call it time management, but balance is key, and that's the one thing I try to always focus on. My wife, I married up. She's a total superstar, and she does travel. So there are times when I've got to balance, meetings, sales calls, et cetera, and I've got kids that need to go to schools. I've got activities, things like that. I got to work with my village around me, my neighbors, friends, et cetera, to help us out. And what am I doing to pay them back, help them out when they do? So how do I reciprocate? And I try never to just take a favor for granted, right? And so how am I doing to help out the rest of that village? So it comes down to, if that means I got to log back on at 10 o'clock at night so I can cook dinner, make sure the kids are taken care of, the school's doing what they need. It's important to be a parent to me. And so I just feel like it's the way I do it is just work the time where I need to be and don't feel bad that I'm not in the office 9 to 5. It's not about that. It's about getting the job done and the outcomes produced at the end of the day. So as long as I can work that out, that might mean you're working nights or weekends, but that means I'm there as a parent, as a friend when it's needed.
And you didn't say this, but you implied it, and I can tell by the way you are. When you're with your kids, you're with your kids. And when you're working.
Try.
Right. As much as possible. Nobody's perfect when it comes to that.
Bad you try. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Kevin, let's talk about the future, which is one of the big things we do on the show. If you were looking out 3 years from today, which would be the end of October 2028, and you and I are talking, and when we were looking back on the last 3 years, what would have to happen in your life, and it could be business, it could be personal as well, where you would feel that was a successful 3-year period in your life?
It's an interesting question, and we briefly talked about it, and when I had it in my head, I kept changing my answer. And I felt like that was, not quite a failure, but I was like, why isn't there not just some 100% crystal clear vision that's there 3 years from now? And I think that there's a couple of reasons. Part of the emphasis that I've always had is better. Just be better, and don't let progress be the enemy of perfection. I always try to make sure that I'm not trying to be a perfectionist, but I want to make progress happen. So
actually, I think it's don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
I know I messed it up. Thanks for calling me on it. Of course you're going to call me on it.
No.
Keep me honest.
I say that because one of my sayings, this 3-year vision question comes from my work in the Strategic Coach with Dan Sullivan. And one of his other favorite expressions is progress, not perfection. He didn't create that, I don't believe, but he put it out there a lot. And, so of course, that's all of us. You want to progress.
Yeah.
But you can also still have along the lines kind of checkpoints where you want to be in a certain period of time.
And I think to get down to some of the tactics of what that would look like 3 years from now, part of what professionally I would like to see what the good that we're doing, just how much of a bigger stage can we do it on? If we're getting the message out and we're helping these companies stay in business, I think I just want to see what can we do to make that happen at a grander scale. How do we grow the amount of companies we can touch and help to
that's
stay in
scaling the
business.
business in a good way where you're keeping your service consistent, the level of service consistent, but scaling it to a bigger audience.
Not diluting the quality of what we deliver is key for sure, 100%. Yeah, and that's something that we always focus a lot on is I don't ever want a client to think, well, we haven't heard from you in forever and you're not delivering quality, but suddenly it's renewal time. So, now we're getting your attention. Never wanted that to happen. So that's not the way I work. It's not the way Jeff works. So we've always focused on that. So that quality can't, and that's been a struggle is how do you scale that? So for sure, that's been a challenge.
So that's the challenge. How do you scale it?
Yeah.
What strengths do you think you and Jeff and your company have developed that will help you meet that challenge?
I think learning to be adaptable to the market conditions. I mean, I can tell you we felt really, really strong about where we were going as a company with new directions, new services, some new staff members in January of 2020. Well, 3 months later, the whole world changed, and then we had to adapt quickly, and we did, and we grew through that.
The key word was pivot then, right? So
yeah, and it was pivoting. It was taking a different perspective. It was also, don't fight. You got to fight the fight you can fight right now, right? I mean, and also George Washington-ism. I'm a study of George Washington. Don't make a decision until there's a decision to be made. So, you can put things in place and start to put some chess pieces out there, but you don't need to execute until it's time to execute. But also knowing when to execute is key. So that's been a key thing I think we've learned.
So think how lucky you were to have the pandemic from that perspective.
Yeah.
Because we've all learned. I completely changed a lot of the ways I do business, the way I develop business, the way everything, because we had to. Right.
And I learned how to quicken sales cycles using video and video content, whether it was recorded or just a Zoom or whatever. So there are ways we learn how do we get content marketing to work for us and push us up to the top of the pile when people are searching for us. That was one of the things I learned. How do we make that better? How do we quicken that?
You and I share that because that's exactly the kind of changes I made as well in our business. And what I find now is, I think you'd be the same, it was scary to pivot at that time because you're doing completely new things. Mm-hmm. It's not scary anymore. I have to pivot now. It's like I can do it on a dime almost.
100%.
Right?
And not being fearful. That was one of the things too, just get out there, go do it. Yep. If it fails, right. That old Silicon Valley, it fail fast,
right?
Whatever, but that's a relative term, right?
Yep.
For some people it's a month, some people it's a year. But if it's
not
working,
failure, it's learning, right?
Yeah, if it's working, have some milestones that lets you know it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big key.
So what, with that in mind, how do you, do you have it in mind how you'll scale the business yet, or have you thought that through, or is that?
So I think that, we've, the people make a big difference. Having the right people make all the difference. And so, I think there's a lot of adaptation to, if 5 years ago the adaptation was to selling in a COVID environment or in a pandemic environment, now the adaptation is selling in an AI environment. How do we sell using AI? How do we deliver using AI? And do we, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So, does it dilute quality? So we need to focus on where those aspects are, I think, to make our clients and our future clients certain that we're not sacrificing quality level for what they need for a soundbite that we delivered it with AI.
Anything else you would add to your 3-year vision? Anything on the personal side? Anything to round that out?
If my kids are still coming to me in 3 years as knowing that I'm a champion for them and that they can come to me with anything, I think that's a win.
How old will they be in 3 years?
My daughter's 14. My son is almost 14. So she'll be in college and he'll be, applying.
That's the right question.
Yeah. So if they're still coming to me and saying, Dad, what do you think? Then that's a win.
Yep.
I want to be relevant, but not overly burdensome. I need them to learn and struggle on their own. And I think my wife and I have enabled that. I just want to make sure that, I'm able to be a person in their life they can come to as an anchor and tell me a problem, and Dad, just listen, or Dad, I want some advice, and I'll be there. And I think that's the biggest key for me.
I love that. I know you're a reader. I'm going to switch. We only have a couple minutes left. What are you reading currently?
So I actually brought it here. It's an older book. It's called Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And
is that Bob
Rotella?
Bob Rotella, yeah.
So it's not even just about golf, but I can tell you a quick story. A few months ago, the last year or two, I started playing more golf, and I'm good, not great. Anybody tell you I'm fun on a golf course, but I'm not. I'm an average player. And
another thing we have in common.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably describes a lot of people, but I have some potential. But I realized, one day I was playing and I was paired up with a guy I didn't know, and I started sharing some personal stuff with him because it was just stuff that was on my mind. And suddenly my swing got better. And suddenly I started playing better and my head was clear because he and I just sort of naturally matched up and started talking. So then I asked him about anything he's read lately about, improving his golf game. He's got his own dusty version of this book because this book is from the 90s. And he said this was the thing that got his mental game right, which meant, he didn't worry about his swing. He didn't, course management and all that stuff. Those things matter, but they're not the most important part. And he said, if you read this book, think about it as, some days you don't have the driver. Some days you're not going to swing it well. So stop it. And he goes, every time you read the word golf, just say life. Life is not a game of perfect, right?
Right.
Same thing to our other line. So he and this was sort of that old guy wisdom, which I love because he was probably 25 years older than me and was still swinging it great and didn't care if you hit a bad shot. It did not register, in his mind. He just, make sure the next one's where you want it to be and focus on the thing that you can do at that exact moment and not what happened before or not what's about to happen. Being in the moment has always been a challenge for me. And so this was sort of a couple of parables all coming together to help me think through it. So this is literally the book I'm reading at this exact moment. I'm about halfway through.
That's great.
So when this show came up and this was the book.
Check out Fred Shoemaker, too.
Okay.
He has a book similar to that and tells his story as a young player where he quit playing because it was so much pressure and he couldn't stand it. And he ends up getting challenged by a guy. He does some service work in South Africa. And this guy finds out he's a golfer and a guy challenges him to play golf.
Nice.
And the guy, in his book, did everything wrong but ended up beating him. And it was sort of the lessons he learned from that. And he had a new approach to golf, which had so much to do with his mindset. And a guy that turned me on to his work, who was a friend teacher, took a couple lessons from him. He had me read the book, which I did, and the name is escaping me right now. But he, one day I was seeing him and I had a match to play, and I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" And I'm thinking he'll tell me something about my swing or something like that. And he thinks about it for a minute, and he says, "Enjoy the walk," right?
Right.
And that's a great way to end our show today.
Yeah.
To everybody listening, enjoy the walk, enjoy the journey, be in the moment. And Kevin, thanks so much for being here. It's been great. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week on Founders Forum.